This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 75. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 75 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be going through naming standards. We're going to talk about bad naming standards. We're going to talk about good naming standards. We're going to talk about how to create a naming standard and why you should actually even care about naming standards. Because you'd be surprised. I get quite a few people who are like, why should I care? That's what I have graphics for. Why do I need to care about naming standards? I just look at the graphics. So we'll talk through all of that in today's episode. Now, as always, you can find the notes and any links I cover in the show notes, which will be at buildingautomationmonthly.com/75. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/75. So now, as you all know, I go through a tip in every episode where I kind of just tell you stuff that I've learned and mistakes that I've made and things that I've just kind of figured out that really help me out. And today's tip has to do with graphics, and specifically it has to do with the new HTML5 web browser-based graphics. So one of the things I've seen in the past is that in order to speed up load times, what a lot of BAS manufacturers will do, they'll do this thing called caching. And basically caching is where you go and let me back up a second. So first we got to kind of understand web servers and how they work. So whenever you're connecting to your BAS web server and you're using a web browser like Google Chrome or Internet Explorer to browse your graphics, what's happening is that your server has a bunch of files called HTML files. That's hypertext markup language, and basically it takes text and then using a bunch of essentially just codes and things like that, it goes and creates structure on your web page. And, actually leave me some comments in today's episode. And if you want me to actually dive deeper into web pages and kind of how they work and CSS and HTML and JavaScript and stuff like that, I could definitely do that because I'm really going to be like 50,000 foot level here describing this. But essentially this web server, the web client, which is the browser, connects to the web server and then it downloads these HTML files, right? And that is what your graphics are. Now, what happens behind the scenes is in order to speed that up, rather than downloading those HTML files all the time, they get cached. And what that means is they get stored in the memory. And sometimes what will happen is things will get a little hosed up, meaning you'll just have some kind of burps in the software and things just kind of are funky. And so what I've seen is that folks are using this and they make changes to the graphics on the server, but those graphics don't reflect on the client. And what's happening is you've cached the older graphics, but the newer graphics are not being updated. Maybe there's some sort of problem with your cookie and your cache isn't refreshing. So what you need to do is you need to go and clear your cache. Now this looks different in every web browser, but essentially you go into the options and you basically just clear the cache. And by clearing that cache, you are then going to wipe out any of those HTML files that are served on your client, or stored on your client rather. They're not served on your client. They're stored on your client. And then what's going to happen once those get wiped out is now when you connect to your web server, your BAS web server, you're going to request new versions of those pages. I got to tell you, this has saved my butt quite a few times working with just different web applications where the cache just wasn't working right and I got stuff stuck on the screen that was old. And by going and clearing that cache, I was then able to pull new stuff from the web browser. So if you're ever having funky issues, especially with web-based graphics, with web-based user interfaces that are thin clients and not thick clients, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go and make sure that you're going and clearing that cache. It's really going to save your butt. Alrighty, so what is in a naming standard? Why should you even care? I mean, that's a really good point. If everything is graphical and we're getting away from the tree structure and things like that, why do you even need a naming standard? I mean, it seems like a lot of work, especially if you've got to go back and change things related to the building automation system. So let's first talk through what a bad naming standard is. So a bad naming standard is not going to give you any context to what is going on in your building. So one building, You may have a floor where they're VAVs, and then another would be where they're boxes, and then something else would be their spaces. And you just got all sorts of different names, and it's zone temp, space temp, room temp, just temp. Sometimes you'll have things which is discharge temp and zone temp are just called temp. It's called temp, and then you're like, okay, which temp? Is it discharge temp? Is it zone temp? Is it supply temp? What temp is it? And so therein lies the rub. You'd be shocked by some of the naming standards I've seen, well, lack thereof naming standards, where folks just literally call things whatever they want. Like you've got space things called space temperature, and they're misspelled, and it's just all sorts of ugly. Because what that ends up doing is now, if you want to search, if you want to do reporting, if you want to do any aliased graphics, all sorts of things that are common in the building automation system person's day-to-day role, you can't do any of that. On top of that, you struggle now because if you want to train someone and you want to train them on a common graphic, a common naming scheme, a common point scheme, you can't do that. And the third final issue is on the analytics and fault detection side. If everything's called temperature and you need to plug certain points into a fault system so that you can go and maybe see simultaneous heating and cooling, or just bad control, or PID loops that are getting out of tune. Well, if everything's called temp and everything's called set point, then what is the temp? Which one's the right temp? Which one's the right set point? And so you can start to see how this can become a really big nightmare. Now, contrast this to good naming standards. And this is where you start to see things that make your job easier. It's pretty easy, right? I just say the inverse of everything I just said to you. It makes it easy to do analytics and trending. It makes it easy to train someone on the standards. And the points are intuitive. You know what you're working with. That's what good naming standards do for you. The problem is that good naming standards are rare. Outside of universities and maybe some hospitals, you don't often find good naming standards. And this is such an easy problem to solve. You see, here's the thing. You can go and enforce naming standards even as a vendor. You can go and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to use naming standards on this. And then you can go communicate that to the owner or the engineer that this is what I'm going to do. These are the standards I'm going to do. And this is why it's of value to you. So you can go and do those kind of things. And then that will just get adopted naturally. Now, granted, I know you can't say that 100%. There will be some times where you'll go and you'll create a naming standard, and then on the next tenant finish out, the low bidder will be some other controls contractor, and they won't use the same naming standard. So I get that. But all in all, you want to try to steer people towards getting standardized, whether that's naming, whether that's point standards, whether that's sequence standards, whether that's graphic standards. I'm always going to beat the drum of standards because they're going to make you that much more efficient. They're going to make it repeatable. They're going to make it easier for your owners to go and train their people on single things. They're going to make it easier on consulting engineers. So you'll always hear me hit that drum. I just don't get it. Some of these sequences, some of these designs that, people are trying to be Pablo Picasso on like a 2-story commercial office building, and it just doesn't make sense. Why would you try to do that? Why would you try to have these unique things? Just follow standards. All right, so I'll get off my soapbox on that, but what makes a good naming standard? Well, from my experience, there's really 3 things that make a good naming standard. The first is that the naming standard is clear. You want to be able to look at a standard and immediately tell what it's referring to. So let's say you have a college campus, right? And let's say that this campus has a building called Waters Building. And Waters Building has 3 floors, and it has multiple different rooms. And it has fan power boxes or fan coils. So then what you might do is you would do, water building dash, floor 1 dash room 101 dash VAV. Now, immediately I can look at that and I can tell what building it is, what room it is, what floor it is, and what type of device it is. That makes things very, very simple. If I'm to get an alarm and I look at the alarm, The worst thing in the world is when you have to have like a decoder ring to be able to make sense of the different names that are on that what's called fully qualified reference. Basically, that is the data reference that the database uses and the whole BAS system uses. It's not the short name, it's the actual long name. And that's often what shows up in alarms. That's often what shows up on trends in reports, etc. So, as I said, the first is that it's got to be clear. The next is that it's got to be concise. Now, what if we did, instead of maybe we did water and then dash FLR1 dash room 101, so RM 101 dash VAV. What if instead of that we did water building dash floor spelt all the way out and then one with not just the number but actually spelling one, and then dash, room, actual spelling out room, and then 101 spelling that out, and then spelling out variable air volume box. In most modern BASs, you might actually be exceeding the character length that you're allowed to have for a name, because you have to realize every time you go and you store an object in computer memory and you have more than a certain amount of characters, that's going to eat up a lot of memory. And if you do that too many times, you can actually eat up all the memory resources of the BAS. So folks have always asked me, why is there character length limits on certain things? That's the why. So now you know some drinking trivia. If you want to go to the bar and have a challenge and be like, why is there a restriction on character lengths? Well, now you can say, well, it's because I'll have to move maybe from an int 62 to a 32-bit int, and that then will eat up more memory, and if I have too many of those, it'll eat up all the memory for the supervisory device or for the field controller. Hey, kind of useless knowledge that's sitting in my head. I don't know how I learned these things sometimes, but it's it's in there, and I thought you all would find that interesting. But what's more important about being concise is that it's just easier to digest. It's easier to look at it real quickly and understand exactly what's going on. And finally, it's going to be scalable. You want your naming schema to be scalable. And what do I mean by being scalable? What I mean by being scalable is that you want your naming scheme to actually be able to grow with you. You don't want to tie so much to something that if you were to add another floor or add another wing or something like that, that you wouldn't be able to then segment it out. So you'll really, that's why you often will go and separate things. You'll separate it by, building, floor, room, device. And by doing that, then you can add more floors, you can add more devices, you can change rooms around. It's scalable. So then you may be asking, okay, this is all well and good, but what if I want to create a naming standard? How will I do that? Well, what I'm going to take you through essentially is a very abbreviated version of my Building Automation Systems A to Z training program, where I essentially spend better part of a whole training module going through teaching you how to create standards. I actually have a standard workbook that you can follow, and it's a template, and you basically follow it and you create your standards from the template. But this is going to be a very brief, abbreviated version of that. So as I mentioned, first you need to pick your naming scheme. Now, what is the naming scheme I recommend? I typically recommend that you do building, floor, space, device. And that tends to scale very well. Occasionally, you will want to add what's called a site to the top of that. Especially if you have a lot of buildings on your site, then you'll want to go site, building, floor, space, device. But, it's either way. It's whichever one you want to do. But that is the approach I recommend. So then once you have all that, what you need to do is you need to then define what is that going to look like. Am I going to go by building name? Am I going to go by building type? Am I going to go by floor name? Am I going to go by wing? How are you going to segment these things? And you've got to be careful. You don't want to pick, wing for one and then floor for another. So that's kind of often where I'll see mismatches, and then folks will be like, well, I got a naming standard. Well, yeah, you have a naming standard, but it doesn't really go from building to building to building. And that will often happen when you'll have different managers in charge of each building, and you don't have a standard that's being pushed from the central facility office. You have it basically being driven by whoever is essentially project managing. So you want to be really careful on that. You want to go and make sure that you're approaching that the right way. So then, okay, you've got the standard. It's scalable, it's concise. You've went and worked it out, so you've got sponsorship from the leaders in your facilities group. And now you need to go and actually ratify the standard, basically put it in writing. So this is where you're going to go and you're going to work with a consulting engineer. You're going to essentially package this up into a piece of paper. Like I said, you could use the standards checklist that is in my training program. And what you do is you go and you fill out this form, you create the standard, and then going forward, you reference that standard in the specification. So you go, all graphics or all names or all points shall be consistent with naming or point or graphic standard X, and that standard can be found in attachment A, BAS standards. And that would be your specification language. And then you would attach attachment A, which would be your BAS standards. And, there's slews of BAS standards out there, and you can pick any which way you want to go. On the high end of things, you got folks like Penn State, which have really complex standards. And then you could just simply have something that is much easier. Here's the caution I'm going to give you if you decide to go down this path. If you decide after listening to this, you're like, that Phil guy, he's never steered me wrong before. I really think I want to go down the standards path. A lot of folks are going to hear this. They're going to get excited. They're going to realize the benefits that could come from this. And they're going to go and they're going to look and they're going to say, man, this is awesome. I got some ideas. They're going to jot them down. They're going to show up to work the next week or tomorrow or whenever. And they're going to look at it. And they're going to look at their BAS and they're going to realize how just in shambles their current naming standard is. They're going to feel overwhelmed and they're just going to shut down. I've been there so many times. I go through this all the time. Like, I have all these ideas. Like, I'm going to create this course. I'm going to create this training program. I'm going to write this. So I've been trying to write this one article on building automation systems that I just know, or at least I feel that this article, once it's done, it's going to get me ranking #1 on Google for the keyword building automation systems. This is going to be like 10,000 words, and it's going to be the most exhaustive kind of article on building automation systems 101 out there. It's going to blow everything else that's in Google search out of the water. It's just going to destroy them. And I've been working on this thing for 3 months now. And I'll do a little bit here and a little bit there, but I just feel overwhelmed. I just feel like, oh man, I just can't get this done. And so I was driving into work this morning. I was listening to Entrepreneur on Fire. It's a podcast I like to listen to. And this one guy, he was interviewing this guy, and this guy was like, yeah, you got to be careful of overwhelm, and how overwhelm basically is... No. This wasn't Entrepreneur on Fire. This was Amy Porterfield's podcast, and she was talking to a lady who was talking about overwhelm and how overwhelm essentially is an excuse for a lot of people. So where I'm going with this is that if you go and you look and you're like, man, there's just too much stuff to do. Don't do that. Don't look at it as like, I've got to do all or nothing. Just look at a piece. Maybe you start and you just start standardizing on your point names. And you're like, I'm going to call everything zone temp. And you start changing those. I'm going to call everything discharge air temp. And you start changing those. And you document it. And you just gradually start working your way through. And then once you've got the points done for maybe a VAV box, then you move to an air handler. And then you move to your chiller. And then once you've got those systems done, maybe you then move to the rooms. Maybe you move to the floors. And you gradually do this, as you get a little bit of time. If you allocate 10 minutes a day, you allocate 10 minutes a day. And I guarantee you that you spend 10 minutes a day looking at ESPN or on Facebook or doing whatever, watching cat videos. Who knows? I'm sure you spend 10 minutes a day doing something that you could replace that 10 minutes with a naming schema. And you may be like, yeah, but Phil, that's just, I'm overwhelmed. I got too much to do. Like I said, it's just 10 minutes. Make it 5 minutes. Make it 3 minutes. Just spend a little bit of time every day going and addressing this issue. And before you know it, you will end up with a naming standard. Folks ask me, they're like, how did you write a book when you work 50, 60 hours a week? How did you create a video course? How are you creating your next video course? And I tell them, every day I do just a little bit. I do about 30 minutes every day. And that 30 minutes, it adds up. And before you know it, you've got a course. Before you know it, you've got a book. Or in your case, before you know it, you have a building automation standard, at least a naming standard. So I really encourage you to kind of look at these things and to not get overwhelmed, to not just shut down. Take it a little bit at a time. Take it a little bit every day, doing a little bit more, and before you know it, you will have built a really nice naming standard. So that's how I would approach it. That's what I want you to really take away from this, is it's not all or nothing. It's something that you can gradually do over time, and you can do it even if you just do it 5 minutes a day. If you do that, like I say about most of the stuff I teach you, if you do it, you will be head and shoulders above other people because they're simply not doing it. Everyone likes to talk about naming standards. They like to talk about point standards. They like to complain. They like to say it's so hard to train my guys because everything's different. But then they don't freaking do anything about it. They don't go and make a change. It's easy to complain. It's easy to cry about something. It's hard to go and make a change. Because it's not simple. You're not going to have a bunch of people who are going to be like, oh, you did so good. You made a naming standard. Yay, good for you. No, you're going to have people who are going to be like, well, I don't like calling it space temp. I want to call it zone temp. And why are you calling it discharge error? Isn't it supply error? And you're going to be like, really, dude? Look, we don't have any standard right now. So does it really matter if we decide on discharge error? And instead, it should really be supply error, or we call it zone temp instead of space temp. Does it really matter? But those are the things you're going to have to face. And you just got to accept that whenever you try to do something different, whenever you try to improve something, you're going to get haters, you're going to get pushback. So why am I spending so much time on the mentality? I don't normally spend a lot of time on the mentality. I don't normally spend a lot of time on kind of the thought process and motivation behind things. But this is how I think. I mean, this is at my core psyche. I do a lot of kind of why behind stuff. That's just how I think. Maybe it's because I'm married to a woman who's got a psychology major and is getting her master's in clinical social work. So maybe just being exposed to that all the time influences how I think. But the key point is that you've got to go and realize that you're going to get pushback. You're going to have things that slow you down, and don't let that. So that's what I want you to take away. All right. That is what I want you to leave this episode with, is that you can do it. Don't let failure slow you down. Keep pushing through, because I quite honestly think creating standards for naming, for points, for graphics, is quite possibly the most important task you can do, especially as a owner of a building automation system, but also as a building automation professional helping an owner with these standards. I mean, it will set you apart from everyone else. So I really encourage you to take this seriously. Alrighty, I think I have beat that horse to death and then resurrected it and beat it to death again. So I think you get the point now. Now, everything I talked about, all the links or anything I kind of reference can be found at buildingautomationmonthly.com/75. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/75. And here's what I'd love you to do. I'd love it if you would go and leave a comment on the comment section and tell me, what do you think about the standards, the naming standards? What do you think about it? How do you approach it? Do you think it's valuable? Why do you think it's valuable? Or why do you think it's not valuable? How would you approach naming standards? Do you have a schema you like to use? I want to hear all this stuff. I want to have that conversation with you because I really think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. So I really look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to going and having that conversation with you. All right, folks, that's it. There we go. We are done with this episode. I'm honestly shocked it went on as long as it did. I was starting up this episode and I was thinking, man, I don't even know what it's naming standards. How long can you talk about naming standards? Because, I mean, honestly, how much is there? You create a naming standard and there you go. But that's it, folks. That's all I have to say about naming standards. So until next time, make sure you keep learning. Make sure you keep improving yourself. Make sure you keep pushing through because you will get better every single day. Thanks a ton. Take care. Talk to you on the next episode.